I'm 50. I have a 22-year-old daughter who's left home now, but I live with my partner, and we currently have his daughter staying with us because she is doing a master's degree.
I'm a chef, been working in the industry about 18 years now. Relocated to Nottingham at the beginning of November.
I live in Frankfurt in Germany. I'm 51, married, got a 10-year-old son. So I'm a dual national. I've been living in Germany now for 20 years.
I'm 36 years old. I used to work as a journalist and author, but nowadays my health is so bad that I'm not able to work anymore.
I work in pensions. I'm the father of 3 children, one at primary school, one at secondary school, and one at university.
I run 2 businesses, one in information security, and I've just started a new business which was heading into its second year of trading at the beginning of the lockdown, called Zmove. We are basically a cargo bike urban delivery company.
These are very, very famous cube houses, how they call them. It's basically architecture icon where tourists go around to take pictures. It's brilliant. It's just brilliant.
So I was an actor, trained as an actor and teacher, and then went into, and I had like a fairly kind of good career on stage, both in Ireland and over here. Then my 2 kids were born, so I kind of started to give that up and became a full-time teacher.
I started off as a teens, 20s, working in communications radio for emergency services. And then in my late 30s, I joined the health service and I trained as a registered nurse.
So yeah, in my mid-40s, married with 3 kids. Oh, hang on, my printer's going. Married with 3 kids, sort of typical nuclear family, live in a little village in the middle of Oxfordshire. Both me and my wife work pretty much full time. Yeah, that's it.
I grew up on what we call the East End of Glasgow, a place called Coatbridge. I was born in like 74, so growing up through there, quite hard times, mostly brought on by Conservative governments at the time, strikes, all that kind of stuff.
I'm a retired teacher. I've been retired just over 2 years now. My husband was also a teacher and he's now recently retired too. So it's just the 2 of us. We have 2 adult sons, but one's at uni and one's flown the nest. So we're here in Cornwall on our own, enjoying life in the house we've been in for about 30 years.
I live in Harrogate in the north of the country, a dad to 3 kids, divorcee, and trying to work my way through, or trying to navigate my way through being a single parent in COVID, which is proving to be quite challenging.
I live with my wife and I've got 2 kids of secondary school age, 14 and 16. Like the eldest is GCSE year this year, so stressful time. Living close to the mountains, obviously, that's one of my big things, is getting out of the house and literally walking from the house to the mountains, which is fantastic. So
I've been a civil engineer for, I left university 7 or 8 years ago now. So before that, I was in the armed forces. I was a Royal Marine for 5 odd years.
At home currently, with working from home, schooling from home, everything from home. So that's where we're all at the moment.
I'm 56. I live in Greater Manchester. I don't hail from here. I live here with 2 daughters, a 9 and 11-year-old. So they're towards the end of primary school and, adapting pretty well to homeschooling. My wife, she's not an educational background, but she's come out of a banking career and she now, post-children, is working in a school office, which she absolutely loves.
I live in Tampa, Florida, in the United States, obviously. I am a licensed clinical social worker, and I work right now for an insurance company. I do compliance audits with behavioral health records. I live with my daughter. She just graduated from college, and she's working to get into medical school. I have family here in Florida as well. My mom and dad live a little north of here, they're 80 at this time. My brother lives down in Sarasota with his family, and my sister's in Key West.
I'm a married father of two. I'm in my mid-40s. I'm a software engineer. At the moment, I'm working for a place that does online exams. It's a big accountancy place, so it does exams worldwide. But at the start of lockdown, I was working somewhere else. I actually changed jobs during lockdown. I was at a small company that did radio stations worldwide.
I'm 34 years old. I'm a dad of two, and I live in rural Gloucestershire.
Oh my God, it's been so busy out there. And I know that the people who are coming to visit and walk along our quayside, I know they're not locals. You know, I've never seen them before. I know that they're out of towners, they're day trippers. And half of me wants to say, fuck.
And about 12 years ago, my wife and I and our 18-year-old son moved north to the Scottish Highlands. I work as an electrical engineer, mostly in the aquaculture industry at the moment, where my employer kind of focuses mainly on supplying goods to the salmon farming industry.
When I was left as a single parent, I couldn't go back to my current job. So now I do copywriting, I do some work for a survey company, and it just means I can be around home and nearby. My youngest has got learning difficulties, so she's needed a little bit more support, really.
I'm speaking to you from southwest Scotland, so I'm in rural Dumfries and Galloway, and by rural I mean rural. So if I look out my window now, I see across fields, I can see Wigtown Bay, part of the Solway Firth, and the Galloway Hills. I'm a retired teacher. I took early retirement. I trained at the Guildhall School of Music and Drama originally, taught drama, taught English, went into senior management, and took early retirement as a head teacher of a pupil referral unit.
Okay, so I'm what you might call a creative nerd, I suppose. I live alone, although I do have a son who's nearing university age. I work in software, but by avocation, I'm I guess a musician, writer, photographer. I do lots of things. I like to explore the world.
I was born in Scotland, spent much of my early childhood in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. And then in 2001, my employment took me to Canada, and I lived there for 15 years in Ottawa before moving back to Scotland in 2016.
I live in Devon, near the rather beautiful town of Totnes, with countryside on the doorstep, which is good. And I've been living here for over 30 years now, but I was born and brought up in London, so I'm a country boy by choice, not by birth, I'd have to say.
Changed fairly dramatically. So I said I worked in pensions, and a big part of my job was going around the country delivering presentations to people. So I spend, at least a few days or most week in London. And as I say, I live in Edinburgh, and a lot of my job was doing things like Dragon's Den type presentations. So turning up, presenting to people. So either groups of people around networking or around thought leadership, explaining how pensions work, or in fact pitching for business. And overnight, all of that stopped. So the travel all stopped, the ability to turn up and present to people all stopped, and all that switched to virtual just like that.
I'm chronically ill, so I'm not able to leave the house much anyway. I had COVID back in March last year. Thanks to a friend who was very abusive to me, and I still have some after effects, like my blood doesn't clot properly, but I'm mostly well, but still almost a year after my illness, I'm still not fully cured.
Everything came to a grinding halt. I started off working from home for the first month after the start of the lockdown, but then was furloughed. Because I worked for the commercial part of the college, so they were able to furlough me because I wasn't needed, basically. But luckily, I didn't suffer financially for that. The college topped up our pay to the full 100%, so I was really fortunate in that respect.
At the end of of September, I took voluntary redundancy after 15 years with my employer, Restaurant Associates. However, I saw it coming, and I'd applied for a role in Nottingham at the beginning of September 2020. I was extremely fortunate that I was offered the job the same day as I actually did my trial. And after 36 years, I moved out of London, moved up to Nottingham to start work on the 4th of November. However, as luck would have it, lockdown 2 started.
All my friends and family were taking it pretty seriously from the outset. So I'd have to say, from a personal level, I locked down early. With my age and genetic high blood pressure, I felt myself to be one of the more at-risk people, should I get it. So business locked down early, which didn't really affect much. But I think we were all pretty committed to that. We've got to be isolated. We've got to do this. And my favourite campaign message was clearly stay at home for these other people.
My daughter was planning actually to go to South Korea, Seoul, in beginning of March. So we were watching very closely the events that were going on. So we knew this was coming. So, and given my status, I went into lockdown early. So I went into lockdown about mid-Feb and didn't go out beyond then. The last time I went into London was to get my asthma jab in West Kensington. And I went on the bus rather than going on the tube, which wasn't great because all the windows were shut and it was like this hot, steamy atmosphere. But I got there and back, and I've been in lockdown since then. Yeah, I'm able to work from home. I've actually changed jobs, which is kind of interesting.
Like a whole lot of the nation, I started to learn how to make bread. I'd been afraid of yeast previously, but soon got the hang of that because, well, shelves were empty and there was no other choice really. Thankfully, where we are, there was a lovely little local farm shop that still had supplies of yeast and had large bags of flour that they could break down into smaller parcels for locals to buy and pick up. And for the most part, the local community has been very, very good during all of this.
I work for a Korean company, so we actually were aware very early that there was big trouble coming. So even in February, we'd already had the first issues, or Korea was already going into the lockdown. So the company was very aware of this, and we were already being very, very careful. So the company was also ready for us to work remotely, etc., etc. So for us, we knew that was going to happen, and that also meant that we, as a family, started preparing very early as well. So we stockpiled. Again, Germany is a little bit different than the UK. There's actually government advice which says you should always have 2 weeks food supply in your house anyway.
So we, as a family, we've had to kind of go through various aspects of lockdown. We've had the schooling, the exams, and all that. I've also got a couple of older parents, so we've been trying to support them. And also my wife's mother, she's in our bubble. She lives the next street down. So that's kind of pretty much where I am.
You know, work changed considerably in as much as all of a sudden you were tasked with working from home. But that was something I was quite familiar with. So it wasn't that difficult. But then as that evolved from being just a short term to long term, and now almost a year, it has different knock-on effects. I think the other changes were that it was the differences in opinion between different people. So some people treated COVID and weren't concerned about it, and other people were very concerned.
Being a single mum and working from home, it's had benefits for sure. It's meant being here 24/7, and it's also saved me £200 in train fares a month, and of course, not to mention childcare for my youngest. Family, fortunately, everyone in my family's kept well. they've all managed to stay safe. Of course, everybody has followed all the guidelines that I've told them to follow. So they wear masks, they wash their hands, they stay out of the shops, they do online shopping. So they've been sensible. And with school, the kids, they adapted to the online world of learning really well. The youngest misses being in school, sure, she misses seeing her classroom friends, but besides that, they do seem to be doing fine.
We overnight had to kind of change our college, which is a performing arts college, so it's practical based. We decided immediately, because we're a small college and we're a bit scrappy, that we wouldn't stop teaching. We'd go straight online and we'd figure it out as fast as we could. And we did. We kind of got everybody online. And also we were aware that we have all these 19 and 20-year-olds who are vulnerable. They are performing artists. They're going to a career which is potentially highly vulnerable now. And so we worked straight through kind of trying to transpose our training online. Interestingly, the person one of my mentors is a guy called Ken Campbell. And he always felt about how theatre and actors should never be legitimate. They're not allowed to be legitimate. And it was an opportunity to kind of say to the students, look, this is your time to kind of step up and take over. In regards that, yes, the West End is closing down, but the West End wasn't going to employ all of us. Now you can own this. And there was an opportunity. And so we really kind of tried to embrace that of saying, especially for my actors, going, well, let's try and work as hard as we can online.
I mean, actually, for me, Zoom it's been an interesting experience. I've enjoyed the advent of the Zoom world because stuck out here on the edge of things, in the far southwest where it's 4 hours to London at best, it's meant that I've been able to take part in things that I never would have been able to go to otherwise. So conferences, events, meetings, all sorts of stuff's come online. And it's actually meant for me and people like me, I think, that we're more connected actually than we were before the pandemic started, which has been good.
Firstly, I completely lost all my work, which so I've worked for a number of years as freelance journalist and stylist, and I'd done music PR. So I was very much a freelancer, and so all of that went. Obviously, there were practical matters like retailers shutting. Bands stopped performing, nothing, absolutely nothing. And also in terms of the press, I'd lost my role as a staffer years ago. So, I was fighting a massive pool of people who'd all trained as journalists, or we'd all worked in other sectors before, but we'd all come back to it. So basically I tried a few things right at the beginning of lockdown, thinking, let's feel the water. And I just binned it all. I just thought, forget it. It's pointless. I'm swimming in treacle for no good reason. And I sort of just let it go, and then have now got a very boring admin job, which I do from home. So it's fun.
Before lockdown, life was pretty hectic. I'd walk out the door at 7:30 in the morning to get a train to work. My wife and the kids would leave shortly after to go to school and work, and I'd get back at about 6, and then most evenings and weekends were spent ferrying the kids around to various clubs or sporting activities. Sometimes we were like ships in the night passing each other. And then in March, it all changed. I think my employer was first to act. We were told straight away, all of us, go home, work from home. We used to do 1 day from home anyway, so we had all the equipment we needed. But it was a bit of a culture shock. Not having that interaction was a little bit difficult. And then shortly after all the schools closed, my wife was effectively furloughed, which for us was probably quite lucky because she was able to administer the homeschooling, as it were.
Myself, I actually got COVID at the beginning. I believe it was either end of February or beginning of March. I got it from London, definitely, when I went for a gig. It was before the first lockdown. I believe that was the last gig on the tour, to be honest, that the band after that cancelled all the tour because of that, because they didn't want, obviously, fans to be infected, and also they themselves didn't want to get infected. my case was this mild case. So I had basically sore throat, headaches, fatigue. I didn't have any breathing problems, but I have absolutely horrible chills and sweats. These are symptoms of COVID which were not mentioned at the beginning, but which are well known now.
Well, 2020 got off to a pretty bad start for our family. My aunt died, and so in March I went to her funeral, and that was just after the pandemic was getting going, but before lockdown. So it was kind of awkward. My parents didn't end up going because they were too vulnerable. But I was glad that I got to it, although everyone was being careful. That was the last time I had a public gathering. I've not been to anything since. I've seen a few friends, socially distanced, walks in the park occasionally, but not very often. I've had no family contact since March, and I'm quite lucky that I can work from home, and I feel privileged in that respect. I'm also quite an introvert, possibly slightly autistic, on that kind of spectrum. So it's probably a lot easier for me because of both of those things. I mean, some people have to go to work or they lose their job. I'm very privileged, but even then, I've gone a bit stir crazy. After 10 months, we all need some human contact, and we all miss it. Pretty much regardless of who we are.
It changed a lot for my children. I mean, I have children in London, in Oxford, and in Bristol, and 2 of them are now on universal credit. One was made redundant before, just at the time of furlough. It was unfortunate. There was an overlap. They are finding life really difficult, I think. For me, I've written some things down. So these are sort of the impacts, and they are pathetic compared to a lot of people. I was 70 last October. I'd got this wonderful birthday planned. I was going to go down to Bath and meet my children and grandchildren and all the rest of it. Had to cancel that. My father lives in Kent. He was in a care home. I couldn't go and see him. I had power of attorney for him, which was almost a full-time job.
Almost overnight, my income dropped by about 75%, which was really hard. The work just wasn't there anymore. So that meant a lot of tightening the belts, trying to see what could I not pay, what could I cancel. The other change really was, as a parent, my youngest was due to sit her GCSEs. Obviously that didn't happen. She didn't get prom. It was traumatic for her. I also had to suddenly become an athletics coach because she's a para-athlete. Her club was shut. So we did solo training for most of last year, and she's a very promising para-athlete. So it was something we had to just try and get through together as much as we could. So it wasn't easy.
My world really is only as far as I can walk or run now. So with family and friends scattered all over the UK, and indeed one of my brothers abroad, I don't see them. And that's the downside for me of life in 2020. But I suppose my balancing piece is my parents and grandparents were refugees or brought up during the war. My mother and grandmother were part of the Jewish wave of refugees that returned to England from living in Europe, where they were at the time of the outbreak of the war. So when I put it in that context, it's small change, I suppose. Yeah.
My dad of 80 years old passed away after contracting COVID. It was an end of a very long journey with him through ill health. And it dominated a big part of that year. In the lead up to his death, there was a long period of time of trying to support him, but from a distance with COVID. He was in hospital for weeks before he died, and there was sort of agonized phone calls with doctors, with nurses, trying to get a picture of what was wrong, because he originally went in with a urinary tract infection. So there was a constant battle trying to get information to try and work out whether he was about to be released because his UTI was sorted out, or whether he was on death's door. And that sort of polarized the difference between the possible outcomes was quite hard.
We had our civil partnership at the beginning of 2020, March the 2nd. We were civilly partnered, which was just at the beginning, the onset of this COVID thing. And we had, again, so fortunate, you know, blessed or something. We'd booked to spend a week with a holiday, like a honeymoon, I guess you'd call it, with our friends in Southern Ireland. And we managed to squeeze that in just before the first lockdown.
I moved house on March the 17th in 2020. Lockdown started on March the 23rd. So I then I was trying to get all the services sorted out because inevitably nothing that had been promised arrived. And the various utilities websites just said, don't phone us, do it online. But they didn't have the facilities to do it online.
One boy was at university and a music course was seriously affected by it. And our other lad, he's actually not managed to get a job using his degree. He's relocated in Belfast because his girlfriend's from Northern Ireland. And he was in the middle of all these job applications, even had an interview set up. But all of that was just put on hold as the lockdown started and COVID was starting to bite.
My wife works in the NHS. That brings a different dimension to elements, you know. So everything else that people go on about, I get sometimes why, financial elements and stuff. But for us, although it's been difficult and challenging from work and stress and all those other things, the homeschooling, I think overall it's really brought us closer as a family. And that's not just, you know, that's 2020. We've had a lot of stuff go on in 2020, like everyone. So outside of COVID, I've acknowledged I was depressed, been on some drugs. I'm coming off them now, which is wrecking me a little bit. My wife's lost her father. She lost her uncle. So we've all had that, as well as being aware of this sort of global issue of the pandemic and COVID, and Debbie having to go to work every day and coming home with that, and her worrying about infecting us. There's also been the trials and tribulations of private life.
It has gotten really lonely, especially because not every day I'm talking to my team. I'm sitting there doing my audits all day by myself. You can get a little stir crazy. And then also with the limitations of meeting with friends and family, and just the general restrictions of not being able to just go wherever you want to go, any place that's inside, for example. I have found that I've done a lot more. I've done some road trips where I go to a fairly remote place and rent an Airbnb, for example, go to local parks, and doing more outdoor things in order to sort of stay sane, I guess. Well, I was a little disillusioned and unrealistic probably, because I thought when the vaccine came out, I thought it would be like bam, 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 and everybody would be able to get it and things would be better. And these are just people's opinion where I go online and look, but there are people who have some knowledge about this type of thing, a pandemic, and we're not looking to change much during this year from what I understand. It's going to be a while, and probably into next year that things can somewhat get back to normal.
They're moving immunisations. My wife can't get a second dose in 3 weeks. She's got to wait 3 months, and she bloody hell works the hospital. She's moving into wards now that are just below the ICU. And she's a physiotherapist, so you know, she has to deal with a lot. But now they're dealing with patients that are a stage below going into ICU, and she can't even get a second dose within 3 weeks. So that sums up the year ahead, really.
I mean, vaccines, yeah, the lights at the end of the tunnel, various tunnels, various lights, bring them on. You know, I'd have it tomorrow if they offered it to me. I'm not going to jump a queue for it, but I'd definitely have it. I don't know. It's dire.
I'm optimistic that the vaccine will start to make a difference. My mother has actually had both doses, So hopefully she'll be safe. So that's one less worry. I am extremely worried for my sons. The one in Belfast has been working in a call centre for Channel 4, and he regards himself as lucky to have something, but it's so far away from being able to use his master's degree in physics.
There's going to be more volatility, change, ambiguity, complexity as well. So I think more of that. And as if I look outside the UK, then you see what's happening in France, the Ukraine, the USA this week, and it doesn't look like being calm or peaceful or much fun anytime soon. Nor do I see socialisation coming back to our norms in the next, well, before the summer at least. So, unfortunately, a lot of discontent and a lot of restlessness from a lot of people.
I suspect we'll be in exactly the same position now until at least Easter. I've already told my kids not to expect to go back to school until after the Easter holidays minimum, and I reckon the same restrictions will be in place for that time, because I just do not think they're going to be able to roll out enough vaccines, and I can't see any decrease in hospitalizations, etc. Before then. After that, as summer hits and people tend to be outdoors a bit more, there might be some relaxation of sort of COVID rules. Hopefully we'll see a drop in hospitalizations and infection rates, and perhaps the vaccine might start to bite then, but it's going to be at least a year before they roll it out fully.
If I'm honest, I haven't got a particularly rosy picture of the year ahead. We're starting the year with a very high caseload and an exceptionally high number of deaths. As we're recording this, there was over 1,000 recorded deaths in the last 24-hour period. And what we know is from the exponential growth of COVID and the way it spreads, that having such a high base as it continues to grow, this is going to have an incredibly big impact, and it's not going to have a quick solution. So I'm sure that the first significant chunk of this year is going to be dominated by the personal stories and the tragedies and the loss of people's lives as COVID continues to rip through the population as it is.
This is just Dumfries and Galloway. So I looked at the number of positive cases over 7 days and the 7-day rate per 100,000 population. And there's only 148,000 people in Dumfries and Galloway, so we're a small spread out rural community. So 13th of March 2020, so I took March as a starting point. We had 13 positive cases over 7 days, which is a rate of 8.73. A week later, it had gone up to 41, a rate of 27. 20th of April, so that's a month later, there were only 13 cases, a rate of 8.73. This is relevant to your question, by the way, you'll see. June, nothing at all. Week of 5th of June to 11th of June, no cases. 26th of July to 1st of August, 4 cases. 7-day rate per 100,000, 2.69. 16th of November, so I cut the summer. We now go to 43 cases over 7 days. 7-day rate 28.9. A month later, 22nd of December, 270 cases, a rate of 181. And the latest figures, number of positive cases from 28th of December to 3rd of January. Number of positive cases over 7 days, 792. A 7-day rate per 100,000 of 532.
I think everyone is hoping that will be better. I hope as well. I think we are a little bit more experienced now with COVID, so we kind of learn how to live in lockdown. So we basically have to adapt. At the moment, the situation is tragic. Especially in the UK, it's very, very bad, and basically I believe that people really need to realize that sometimes you really need to shut up and listen, because that's the result of it. That's the result of it, that many, many more people dying and will die because just people think that it's not their business, that they will just be exception or something. I don't know. I quite don't understand this.
It's probably going to be a lot of people being angry about various different things. I think the pandemic is going to go on most of the year, if not beyond, before everything's sorted out. Combined with various issues from around the world, Brexit and so on, it's going to cause a lot of unrest. I'm quite scared about it, but I'm sort of trying to grit my teeth and carry on. I have a watchword every year instead of New Year's resolutions, and I decided that probably I wouldn't be able to do much this year because of everything going on. So the sensible thing to do was plan for what I would do when it was all over. So this year, it's plan is my watchword. So I'm planning to plan.
We have a lot of second home owners, and we have actually, I mean, this is anecdotal, but we have heard from different shopkeepers who have said, "Oh, we had somebody in here from wherever it was, London, Birmingham, whatever." And we said, why are you here? "Oh, we've come here to get away from the virus because we saw that you didn't have many cases."
Obviously, we're all waiting for a vaccine. Along with everything else they've managed to cock up, I'm sure the government will cock up the rollout of the vaccine as well, because why would they not, really? They've managed to mess up everything else they've put their fingers to. So I'm assuming that people like me, I'm in my late 60s, so I did a quick calculation online. I think there are 12 million people ahead of me in the queue for a vaccine. So I can't see I'm going to get one before about March at best, really.
The ruling body saying, well, we have to do this now. And then they change their minds immediately, so that every other system has gone, well, we can't believe in the people that are making up our rules. And also, they're not adhering to those rules, which I think is a very English thing. Interestingly, right now, I'm rereading The Ragged Trouser Philanthropist. And you read it and you go, well, that feels like it could be right now. And there is this sense of, like, that also this sense of overwhelming kind of incompetence at times, of this isn't being handled well. And you're trying to use spin. I got really annoyed the other day about the innate optimism, this need for optimism. And I do remember a time of pragmatic governance. And I think in Ireland, there still is that sense of pragmatic governance of, look, this is going to be hard and we'll get through it. Instead of this, no, we'll be out by next week. This patronizing as if we're being spoken to like children. If we keep on being spoken to like children, we will act like children, and people are acting like children.
I don't really have a great deal of confidence in the way we're approaching the year ahead. And I'm just literally basing that on the year that I've had. So the year that I've had was, it was stop and start, and it was a roller coaster. All of a sudden, everything was okay. Go back to work, eat out to help out. And then all of a sudden, no, don't eat out to help out. You've got to stay back in the house again. And again, for the year coming up, I know some businesses are going to be very keen to get people back in the offices, whereas there's other businesses that I know of that aren't even thinking about getting people in the office until the very end of the year, August, September of the year. And that gives a lot of anxiety. So I think, like most people, we're suffering with anxiety.
I think in Germany, I think the next couple of months are still going to be locked down, obviously, but I'm quite optimistic about the way things will go. The vaccination program has started. It seems to have started later than the UK one, but it seems to be a little bit better organised. There are still question marks about how long it's going to take. I think anyway, realistically, we're not in at-risk groups, so we're going to be later on in the year anyway.
I think that we'll get to sort of Easter time where we'll have the vaccination program. Got to believe it's going to work better than test and trace programs, so that they're going to actually get people vaccinated. We're going to start to be able to get back to some kind of normality. I expect my role will involve blended work between people there in person and sharing stuff virtually, because we've managed to gain a lot of good skills through this virtual environment, but there is nothing like having individuals in the room to spark off, learn from. That whole piece about blended in-room and online, I think, is something that we'll see going ahead. I think schools will get back to normal. So yeah, and I if I think about things that didn't happen that the kids were all looking forward to, so big events, we were all going to different festivals and all of that kind of stuff all just stopped this year. I think we'll get back to that. I'm not sure exactly what the mechanisms for making it happen will be, but by May I would have thought we'd be getting back to that kind of world, and I should be able to go back to football as well.
Well, supposedly I'm getting vaccinated in the next 4 weeks. Woohoo! I'm in the level 4 group. Whether that will happen or not, I don't know. I don't see much change. But it has to be done really successfully. The virus is out there. It's too widespread. We haven't learned any of the lessons. We're going to get, people are going to get vaccinated, fast or slower. But so much damage has been done. It's not going to be just flick a switch and we're back to normal. We're not going to go back to, it's like the new norm, isn't it? And we don't know what that means.
I can see us being significantly locked down, and by this time I think we're calling for a significant lockdown for a very long period of time. So I see this going on beyond April, if in reality. And that means for some of my life, again, in my privileged position of being able to afford to do it, I can stay and work at home. It's going to become increasingly difficult mentally. The strain on myself and my colleagues is palpable. We're all working, friends and family particularly. I've got a young daughter up in Edinburgh on her own, and that really is where my main concerns lie. The effect on the economy, along with the Brexit issue, is going to be really difficult to predict and understand what the hell's going on. We're already seeing impacts from our business. I can't get stuff from Europe at the moment. So that's my main concern, is how big an impact is that double whammy going to make on us in the middle of the year?
I'm still a bit nervous about what's happening with this. Now we've come out of the transition period, and obviously we get to see the effects of that, especially with the job that I do and the implications it's going to have on us, especially with Erasmus going away. That was a huge thing for our vocational students. So I'm a bit nervous about what's going to happen with that. As far as the pandemic's concerned, I mean, I'm hopeful that the government will get the vaccine rollout right and that we'll all come out of it the other side. But the way things are looking at the moment, I'm not massively hopeful, to be honest.
Work-wise, for the next couple of months, pretty bleak. However, the speed of which the rollout of the first level of vaccinations is going, it might be better. I honestly don't know. From a personal perspective, my mental health suffered from being alone in a city I don't know, no way of actually socializing. But I'm trying to keep it together as best I can. For a long time, my job defined who I was, and I allowed that to happen. And it still does to a point. The structure and everything of that defines me. However, I know that, there's not much I can do at the moment. I've just got to be ready to return to work and get back to the level at which I work at. I'm going to be working in a world-renowned 2 Michelin-star restaurant. I need to be able to hit the ground running.
I honestly don't feel like it's going to be much different to 2020, I'm afraid. I've got very little faith in the government doing the vaccine rollout, as they've said. And, we're going to start to see the impact of Brexit as well hitting. So it's going to be a double whammy. So I'm hoping late summer, maybe the autumn, it might start to improve a bit. We might see some relaxation, but then once the autumn starts, we could be back where we are now. So I'm not very optimistic.
If I'm honest, I would love to put rose-tinted glasses on and say, yeah, the vaccine's coming, and in Mr. Johnson's words, by Easter, we'll all be on an even keel and ready to go. But since the start of this, my wife and I have listened most to science-based evidence, and they said from the very outset the way the viruses work is they come and go in waves until a vaccine is there, and until enough people are vaccinated. It's going to be lockdown after lockdown, and then relaxation, and then make more bread, son. They're in lockdown again.
Vaccines have now been approved and the rollout has already begun, but there's still so many unknowns and we're learning things every single day. And then we've got this long-term COVID that people are dealing with. And of course, not everybody's going to get the vaccines tomorrow. It's going to take a long time. So yeah, I'm sure things will finally be eased. I'm sure by the summer, we'll start to see some type of return to normality. But I don't see it happening quickly.
With us, it's a bit of a worry and a struggle. I mean, work-wise, I'm quite confident there. I'm in an unusual position if I'm now working with a team where I've only met one person out of maybe 10 people that I'm working with because I knew them beforehand. We're unlikely to be back in the office till at least April, probably much later on in the year. So work's a bit weird, but I was used to working from home anyway, so that side of things isn't a concern. I'm quite enjoying that. It's a new challenge. I'm learning new skills. Home's a slightly different setup. My kids, one of them is exam age. He had the Nat 5s last year. He's now doing hires. That's totally up in the air. This morning they went back to school in Scotland for the first time, and that's everything fell over immediately, and it's now just gradually starting to come back. But we've got major kind of concerns about how that affects what's happening, because we've been planning for exams, but they've been struggling to teach in schools.
I certainly hope that this year will be better than the last year, but I'm not really, I'm pretty sure that the pandemic will be over this year, but for me, the lockdown will not be over. I still be very sick because of my chronic illnesses. I still won't be able to leave my home much. So for me, when the pandemic ends, everyone else will celebrate. And for me, it will just be a reminder that the lockdown never ends for me.
I would say that let's look forward to 2022 when we might be seeing some real change.
People need to be held accountable for what they say and what they do. And when you see, and I've thought this for years now, when you see leaders in the private world or in government who mess up and don't resign and get away with stuff, and people are just like, oh, well, you know, they support Brexit, I don't care that they did this. People aren't being held accountable. When you see leadership not being held accountable, it takes time, but it's been going on for a long time. That has just gone all the way through society now, and everybody thinks they can just do what the fuck they want. And we need to bring accountability for your actions and your words back into this society, because accountability at the minute is nothing.
I suppose it's a byproduct of technology, which has come on so quickly in the last 20, 30 years, so quickly within our lifetimes. We can't really keep up with the changes that it has brought around to our daily lives. New technology everywhere, social media everywhere, the ability for the most idiot of idiots to get online and spread idiotic things, and people love extremes, and it's dividing us terribly.
It's so frustrating, but I think it's just a natural climax is probably the wrong word, because it's not going to stop anytime soon, but I think it's just a natural progression of all the misinformation and disinformation that's been flying around regarding politics, etc., for the last 4 or 5 years. I don't know what to do about it. One of my close family members is quite far down the rabbit hole with the whole anti-mask, anti-lockdown stuff, and there's nothing you can say to combat it. I think certain commentators with huge influence are tantamount to fifth columnists. I think they're like a modern version of Lord Haw-Haw. And I think, although I've always been against it, I think there has to be a point where we have censorship. Because too many people are believing it, and we only have to see the power of the media in the States.
Disinformation spreads because it taps into core emotions, either fear or sometimes positive, but normally negative emotions that people feel. And this has been exaggerated, they've been exacerbated by the coronavirus, by the difficult situation that people have been finding themselves in. They've been looking for cheap solutions when actually the answers are very complex and hard to understand.
I do follow different people on Twitter, and there's a lot of people initially were holding up Sweden as a really good example of, this is what we should be doing. And then suddenly they've gone quiet because actually Sweden's in a bit of a mess.
I think disinformation is a wonderful way that I suppose that, rulers or governments in all countries can confuse or obscure or use smoke and mirrors to counteract the democratic force the internet should be. So very discouraging, and it's given rise to all sorts of quite bizarre conspiracy theories and concepts, including the ridiculous idea that COVID doesn't exist or is just a scandemic. Yeah, I see it as a very real challenge. So very disheartened to see how the disinformation has been so effective, really.
Where to begin? There are people who are using COVID to bang on with their sorry, it's going to be political, their right-wing agenda. There are some people who are absolutely shameless with regard to that. There are some people who are just, excuse my language, but basically piss ignorant.
Ever since about 12 to 15 years ago, something like that, I've been listening to podcasts a lot. I listen to science and skepticism podcasts, and they talk a lot about media literacy, critical thinking, cognitive bias. And if you listen to the way scientists talk, and I really admire science, particularly because of this attitude of reverence for epistemology, the way we get information. The word science means knowledge, and there are good ways to get knowledge and bad ways to get knowledge, and we really need to be teaching more of that stuff somehow. I don't know how. If I knew how, I'd write a book. But the other thing that I've noticed when I was at school is the way history is taught. It's very fact-based, but although the facts tend to be very selectively presented, they were in the 70s, certainly. Lots of empire stuff. They covered the modern history and the wars as well. But there wasn't very much thinking about the history and what led to things and what the human psychology was. And perhaps if there'd been a bit more of that, people might have been a bit more aware of who not to vote for, shall we say.
It's very interesting. My daughter and I were talking about it, and she's a big proponent of improved education. She feels like a lot of this, people believing the disinformation is due to poor education or understanding of science. Whereas, my background as a social worker and just having lived several decades on this planet, I feel like people are a lot more influenced by emotion. I'm not saying that we don't need improved education where people can think more critically. That would help. But all of this division that's happened, all the disinformation and the effect that it's had is really working on people's emotions. So, and I feel like they've just really taken advantage of that. The powers that be, the influencers who are using disinformation. And they know our weaknesses and they take advantage of it.
Disinformation is not new. The problem we've got, I think, now is that it's very much easier and quicker to spread disinformation. And for me, it's not about COVID in particular, because whatever it is, there would be disinformation. So there was masses of disinformation about Brexit, disinformation about Trump, disinformation about COVID, you name it, there's disinformation. So, and I'm not even sure that that's the problem. I think the problem is how information is disseminated and whether or not there should be any controls, any better controls over various forms of media. I mean, I include the press in that, the press and the online media, whether we should be looking at ways in which they're obliged to speak the truth a bit more often.
there's this sense of going, the government's asking this, I don't care. So people are going to other sources for information, for leadership, Facebook, conspiracy theories, because, you know, conspiracy theories always contain a grain of truth and a grain of sensibility in them. And you're looking at, there's this sense of, there's this dawning of governments saying, we don't know what we're doing, but we're always going to try and blag it. And they're not very good at it. And so nobody knows who to listen to. And everybody, I think, is very fed up. What I'm seeing is people are worn down, and especially by having changed, worn down, and also by just this disrespect from the higher tiers. You know, we clap for nurses, we don't actually help them out. And then saying it's your fault, and everybody's just rolling their eyes now. And so it's inadequacy, heaped on inadequacy.
So where I used to work, as trained as a journalist, but how I used to work was very much about how critical communications are. So, you know, there should have really been daily briefings every day from Downing Street. And we're not saying it had to be a minister, but there should have been somebody who was the key spokesperson who could relay, dull as it is, the dullest of the dull of the information. So there needed to be less of this sort of like almost, oh, it's so cringeworthy. I mean, I don't think actually that face, space and hands was too bad in the end. But it was the fact that we had to come down to these stupid wording instead of actually being treated as grown-ups. You know, Michael Gove speaks to people as if they're absolutely stupid. You know, and actually all we had to do was somebody stand up and go, right, this is the reality, this is how it is, this is the aim, and this is how we're going to disseminate information on a daily basis. Then we're going to have Prime Minister briefings twice a week, we're going to have this person briefing on such and such a day. And those stupid questions from journalists, I'm sorry, but my profession, or my ex-profession, what are they doing with those two questions? Pointless. One question, get to the nub of it. And stop asking questions that the government have preordained. You know, where's the critical analysis?
Telling somebody that it's very difficult to argue with somebody that they're wrong, that you intrinsically and psychologically you don't want to believe that you're wrong. So disinformation is a very powerful thing, and we rely on the trust that we have with those in public office not to tell lies. And we have a tacit relationship with news organisations and media providers to also provide truthful, non-commentary information.
The first thing we've got in Germany are the so-called Querdenker. So a Querdenker is, it translates literally to lateral thinker, but it has a little bit of a more rebellious connotation as well. So, for example, Querstehen is to stand in the way. So it's also someone who's thinking differently, but also challenging conventional thought. And, you know, they're the people who have swallowed the conspiracy theory Kool-Aid, if you like.
It's really interesting. I think it's shocking. Now, I'm a natural skeptic, so I don't think it really affects me that much. I have friends who are actuaries who are actually producing the tables and releasing them on Twitter, so I can see the core information. I've probably had a bit of foresight before the government were actually doing their updates and things like that. So personally, I could see what was happening. I'm not surprised in a world where you've had Brexit, you've had Trump, all that focus on disinformation and creating discontent and creating disinformation. I'm not surprised that it exists.
And I can tell you that I used to live in communist country. In communism, communist propaganda is nothing compared to propaganda in the UK. Honestly, nothing.
I think COVID disinformation is, excuse my French, fucking frightening. Like, you know, I go on social media and I see some of the stuff that's up there and it's like, what the?
In places where, I'm not going to say we should have like a totalitarian state where, you know, all dissenting voices are muted, but in places like China where they don't have a choice of the different media they consume, there's been compliance and you know, people have just got on with it and come out the other side. Whereas here, you get your I like to call, everyone calls them COVID idiots, don't they? Spouting their nonsense on social media, and it doesn't take very much for that to gain traction, and then you get a few big names doing it, and everyone's thinking, well, you know, if they don't have to follow the rules, why should I? And we are where we are because, not just because of that, but it's definitely a factor, isn't it?
Actually, I think I've got friends who I've moved away from a little because they've completely been taken in by the nonsense, and some others that have really surprised me, and it's just a mixed bag.
I used to be a medical writer. I used to write about medicine for a living. So I fought with medical misinformation for a long time, especially on the internet. There's so much misinformation about everything. But of course, the whole COVID misinformation thing, it made me angry. And especially the way people treat COVID as something like it's either a cold or you die. But there are many people who don't die, but they never get well.
They don't understand the consequences of what they're doing. I'm sure some of them don't believe what they're doing. They're just doing it for the clicks.
It's very dangerous because people often believe what they read without fact checking. And I think that as effective new treatments and vaccines become available, disinformation could hinder uptake and further jeopardize efforts to overcome this COVID-19 pandemic. I think people need digital and health literacy skills to navigate and make sense of the COVID-19 content they see online, to know how to verify its accuracy and reliability, and to be able to distinguish facts from opinions, rumours and falsehoods. And I actually do believe that with COVID, this is something that these are a set of skills that teachers need to start teaching now in schools from a young age.
I'm on Twitter a lot, and like the stuff that you see on there, I mean, I fully accept that lockdown has other impacts, and I'm kind of concerned that we're stopping hospitals that maybe we could find some way of working with. But I mean, things are still going on. I know my mum's had an operation, so I know that things haven't completely stopped. I've got an uncle that's got cancer, and he's still getting treatment. It's impacted things, but it's not stopped them. But there's people that are just determined that this whole thing's a farce. We just got to go out and do our own thing, and that's kind of killing me. I mean, I'm been following the rules. Keep my family safe and staying in, and then you see other people that are having more people to the house than they should do, or kind of going out when they shouldn't do.
It's an interesting day that you ask me this, given what's currently happening in the United States Capitol. It's a similar form of disinformation than people in the States have been being fed for 4 years now. And unfortunately, the thing that's allowing us to talk here, this wonderful thing of the internet and the technology, also sadly allows idiots access to information and people that they ordinarily wouldn't have in years gone by. And unless they are either taught or have a natural ability to think critically about things, it festers, it becomes something that it should never have become. And you get people taken to the street saying that COVID's a hoax, having hugging parties without masks, and yeah, just generally making things worse. Stupidity's got a lot to answer for, but the people who feed on that stupidity have a lot more to answer for.
Some of it has just been so ridiculous. The things like there's a microchip in the vaccine, I mean, and people are believing it. I would wish that platforms like Facebook would actually do something about it. I think they're a real hive for disinformation spreading out. And the trouble is, it's had an impact. It's making public, more reluctant to, follow the instructions and everything. So I think it's been damaging. It's dangerous, but I don't know how we stop it and how we educate the public more to, question it. Don't believe everything you read.
Could they have handled this better? Yes. Why didn't we close the ports and the airports day one like they did in Australia and New Zealand? Why is it taking a year to say somebody coming into the UK has to have a negative test, stuff like that. I think the combination of Brexit and this happening at the same time, some eyes have been taken off the ball in certain ways. However, people have got to realise that one thing that's quite amazing is how quickly these vaccines actually, the 2 vaccines, have come out so quickly. That's quite incredible. When you think about how long they normally take, it's quite an amazing thing.
I started off being quite positive. What they did in March made sense. I mean, I was with my previous job, I was followed for 4 months, and I accepted it. I could see the advantage of it. With the good weather, it made it a lot easier. I mean, I used that as a chance to kind of upskill a bit, and then obviously I changed job. That was quite handy for kind of spending time with the kids, getting them through the exams last year. But I'm really disappointed that they didn't prepare for the second wave. We were told from the start that there's going to be multiple waves of this. Spanish flu had 4 waves. So we really need to be prepared. The one in the winter is going to be much worse. And then as soon as everything tailed away in the summer and it got better and we got back to normal in August, all preparation seemed to go out the window. There seems to be no planning for this second wave, even though it's going to be worse.
I don't think there's been strong communication. I think on a high level, the government's handling of the pandemic has often appeared reactive rather than proactive. I think that last January 2020, it felt like they were not paying attention to what was happening in China. And even when we saw the horrific scenes weeks later in the Italian hospitals, the airports were still kept open. I think at one point it just felt like that the government thought somehow the UK would be immune to what was coming our way. And of course it wasn't.
Where I live in Scotland, obviously we have a bit of a bipolar look at 2 governments. And as far as I can see, the Scottish government and Nicola Sturgeon in particular has probably been one of those people who, if she was in your community, would step up and help, because she has gone to that lectern day after day with horrible information to give the nation. She's never shied away from it, and she seems, and her government seems to have been as open and honest as they can be. And then when you take a look further down the road, it's just not been the case. We have a Prime Minister who, as soon as he could step away from that lectern, did, and he doesn't want to be doing that. He doesn't want to face the public. He doesn't want to be honest, unfortunately.
If you have a good government, you would expect them to be proactive. The main problem with this government is they're reactive. They only react to crises. They react when they're pushed into things. It's all about the sound bites. They've been behind everybody else every time. For example, like they're not testing people when they're coming into the country. They're only just talking about doing that now. It's ridiculous. I've got an incredibly low opinion of them, and I'm trying not to swear here.
I think there's been a clear difference. So partly that's down to the leadership. So if I take Scotland first, I think Nicola Sturgeon, we've been pretty blessed with a leader who is compassionate, pretty trustworthy, and she doesn't try and take a ridiculously optimistic view. She doesn't flip-flop. She feels like she's actually hurting through all of this stuff as well. And she's been pretty robust when people have made mistakes. They've been sacked pretty much as she possibly could. She did that. We've tended to take action quicker than the UK government, and she's often been pilloried for that action by right-wing media, by even other parts of government saying, no, you shouldn't be doing this stuff. But we've tended to see that she has led pretty well, pretty high levels of trust. So I've been pretty satisfied. I mean, they've made lots of mistakes, but I've been pretty satisfied that we have a leader there who's led from the front.
I'm not really happy with how my government has handled this pandemic. Of course, that probably goes for most people. Everyone says too strict, not strict enough. But still, I think it could have been handled much better, and especially focusing on ending the pandemic and not just living like, okay, we'll do a lockdown, we'll end the lockdown. It's just like countries like New Zealand, they actually were able to stop the pandemic there.
The ethical difference is in the way that, I mean, okay, there is less scrutiny on the Welsh government in general because the UK government removes a lot of the spotlight, which is helpful for the Welsh government. But Mark Drakeford didn't carry on as normal when COVID hit. He moved into a hotel away from his family and behaved the way that he expected other people to behave, and we didn't see that from central government. They just decided that they were special and that they could do what they liked, and then baffled and bullshit their way out of it. And the Cummings affair, I think, really undermined everything, didn't it? Because people then knew they didn't have to follow the rules.
Living in Wales, we've got the Welsh Government rules to follow here. And I was mostly supportive throughout up until very recently when they seem to have switched to following what Westminster are doing.
It's been handled appallingly badly, with no real decisions being made, no ongoing strategy. And it looks like at almost every stage, the current government is handling everything as a PR incident. And not even a series of PR things, but I mean, a series of, in a strategic way, but just a series of individual PR statements to try and manage today's headlines in the red top newspapers. And there's no substance in what they say whatsoever.
It's lies and greed. Everything they say for their own reason. I work in user experience, so I know about focus grouping. I can see what they can do. I can see the manipulation. They say one thing and do the complete opposite. And they have just used this as an opportunity to enrich their friends and their pockets.
Herd immunity was the first example that I can remember. It was rescinded. Sometimes they choose to listen to scientific advice and sometimes not. The briefings were even confusing. I think the Christmas just passed when 5 days mixing was reduced to 1 day, schools returning, and then a day before, not returning. I think the contact tracing app was a disaster and a huge waste of taxpayers' money, which we all knew was going to happen. I think the biggest for me was the failure to launch the test and trace when we opened up society again after that lockdown. I thought that was a huge failure and such a tragedy and a shame. And also the fact that they never mandated the wearing of masks. I was in Asda today and people are still not wearing masks.
The government genuinely doesn't really care about the pandemic. Its mind is elsewhere, and it's playing a game with the pandemic. And I think that you can see that with the way in which it's done. Let it go through I can't remember the exact phrasing, but let it wash through the population. When Mr. Johnson gave his TV epic on Good Morning Britain, or whichever television programme it was on the morning. I think that attitude to the people has continued. I don't believe that the government truly cares about the people.
You know, Johnson on the news today with the boast, we've done more vaccination than other countries in Europe. I don't really care. You know, Europe is, other countries are doing what they're doing. We live in Britain. It's a bit pointless doing this best of class crap when, excuse my French or English, when actually the reality is, what is the exit strategy? Where are we now? Where are we going to be? That's for businesses. Where are we going to be? That's for schooling. Where are we going to be in terms of sociability? There should be a three-pronged sort of strategic and tactical effort by this government. This government is the worst administration we could possibly have. They have none of the fundamentals of government, and that's somewhere that I used to do a lot of comms work before, and there is nothing anymore. That whole fabric of actually delivering an administrative body, the civil service has been decimated by this government to the point where you're losing people who, people say, they're slow or whatever. No, they're not. They know how to roll things out, but no one will listen to them. No one will take their advice.
If I look down south, I don't think you've got the same level of leadership, the same level of compassion. I don't think there's a we're all in it together approach there, which we've probably had a bit more of that we're all in it together approach in Scotland. And you know, the whole Cummings Barnard Castle stuff was just ridiculous. That really helped to create a division between the people and I guess the political elite, or whatever you want to call them. There was definitely a division sown there.
They were pretty open with us, and I think they were pretty straight with us as well. They did lock down quite early. Again, they could have locked down a little bit earlier, but you know, I have to say I'm so glad that I'm not the one making the decisions, because whatever you do, it's going to be wrong to some extent, and you will never know what the best course of action was. But in general, I think they've handled it pretty well. There have been a couple of good examples where they were treating us like adults. There was a case in the summer where people were congregating in public squares and drinking, and we were then told officially by the government, you need to stop that, and people carried on, and then it was banned.
Not closing schools, opening for Christmas, you know, all this go out, eat out, or what was the name of it? This is wrong. This is wrong. And 80,000 dead people. Oh my God, that's the whole town. That's the whole town. 1,300 a day. It's basically a secondary school. Can you imagine that you go with your son or somewhere to get him to school, and tomorrow all this school is dead? There's no one there.
Another point that came up on Radiolab recently, a podcast, was an American journalist was saying about how in these times of real disorder, and he said they gave it in particular towards the climate crisis. He says we really are going to see that there is no difference between our political parties, the lack of difference in our political parties. That because politics is this is a career path now. Therefore, there's no way of anybody to kind of judge things. And that idea of there is no there's no foundation of ideology really. And I think that's what's happened in America. People have gone, we've got a bit of an ideology, let's run with it. Because actually left and right, there's no difference really. And also when you put them in charge, they're still not getting things done. And that's what you want happening.
As I was saying before, when I was doing freelance work, I was working at a really great independent department store in South London, and we literally wanted people to leave. When people were working in there, when colleagues who we were working there, we were like, what are you doing now? You know, I think everybody right at the beginning were 2 steps ahead of the government, and I think they are still now. So this week, I suspect our anxiety around the fact that the chain hasn't been broken will propel us into wanting the government to be very clear about what we can and cannot do. Not because we want those restrictions, but seriously, I don't want to be responsible for someone else's death.
Extreme dissatisfaction with the government handling, but also I hold culpable the non-existent opposition as a healthy challenge, or any material cooperation. I see what I would see as a great negligence, almost criminal levels of negligence.
So I'd be tempted to describe it as slapstick if the consequences weren't quite so serious. I mean, it's been inconsistent, it's been ineffective, and honestly, I think probably I started by calling it slapstick because it was covering up probably quite a deep-rooted fury that I have about it, really. I'm not naturally a very angry person, but this is driving me towards a state of anger, towards the lack of political leadership here.
This is going to be a cliche, but I think Mr. Johnson is a disaster, and Nicola Sturgeon is about as good as we could hope for. I think the UK government has been way behind the curve. I think they've been inept. I don't think they should have lifted the first lockdown. I think they should have been much more strict. This apparent conflict between life and livelihoods is it's far too simplistic a dichotomy, because in fact lives equals livelihoods. You protect the lives, you are protecting the livelihoods.
I'm fond of saying this, but I'll say it to you because we've not met before. I'm pretty convinced that the averagely intelligent sixth former could do a better job of running a country than the government that we're currently living with.
Well, it's tempting to say we barely have a government. I suppose the best I can say about this lot is it's better than anarchy. I really am. I've not been impressed at all. They didn't act fast enough. They constantly ignore scientific evidence, mixed messaging, changes of direction, which all leads to distrust, I suppose, and it costs more lives.
We have a governor who is a big Trump backer, supporter. In fact, the state has done a very poor job. We've had very high numbers. We have a lot of older people, retirees who come here. So I suspect that plays a role. And also our economy is based on tourism. So I understand the push and pull of not wanting to completely shut things down. But I feel like if they had just done it from the beginning, pushed masks, pushed a complete lockdown, we wouldn't be dragging this out as much as we're having to do.
Nobody should lose their job. Nobody should lose their house. And people shouldn't go into poverty because of this pandemic and the decisions that we need to make as a society. You know, you can make decisions about the national debt and you can argue about whether we have to pay it back or not. But worst case scenario, I would rather contribute my taxes into sustaining an economy to get us through this, and which is the right thing to do. And I think that ethos still stands. I think we're getting ourselves into debt, but we're doing it half-arsed. Do you know what I mean? And actually shutting down whatever. And if you've got a profit you've got with your business and you can demonstrate that, then you should be reimbursed accordingly, because we could have done this the right way and it probably would have cost us less.
The money, oh, the money that's been wasted. It's more than 12 billion, isn't it? Test and trace. Whatever happened to that? Well, no, nobody even talks about it. It wouldn't have worked on my phone anyway, even if it had worked. It's just, I could cry.
I've written this down. Incompetent, dangerous and wrong. And unable to look at the best practice in other parts of the world. Now, I realise we weren't geared up because we hadn't had previous dangerous respiratory viruses like they had in Asia. So a response like Taiwan or Korea, South Korea, would have been unlikely, but we didn't learn from them, and we're still not learning from them. And New Zealand did the dramatic thing, which latterly Australia have followed, and it was in the news yesterday. We had more deaths yesterday, reported yesterday, than Australia have had in the entire pandemic.
Sheer horror, basically. I mean, from ignoring that Cygnus report that actually should have prepared them for how to deal with a pandemic, from really having up to 2 weeks warning from what was going on in Italy. And, Spain and France weren't that far behind and they were ahead of us, and we should have been able to take note. I think we are, I think there's so much spin and misinformation, and it's as if the media are afraid to call it outright lies, but actually when you listen to different voices, they're clearly sometimes certainly economical with the truth.
I actually do think that the public, for the most part, have done a great job following what has been a really confusing set of rules. I think that NHS workers deserve more than just claps. They should have more pay, and we should now be acknowledging the fact that they are coping with PTSD. But I think that regardless of what anybody says, the statistics tell the story, and the UK has one of the highest death COVID rates in the world. And I think that the legacy of the government for future generations will always be the way they mismanaged the COVID-19 pandemic.